Hi, my name is Eleazar Gonzalez. I work for Lincoln University on Missouri. And today's session, we are going to present a topic about understanding our soil in the garden and any kind of soil. And before we start, we were planning to know to what extent you know about soil. We see so far we had 8 responses. Most of you had answered the survey. And we will be, everybody coming in right now, go to the chat and please help us with the survey. It's a short survey. Then today we will have Dr. Jurrizo Tunisa. He will be presenting about soil. And he is a professor of Lincoln University. He has been here for some years teaching students and farmers about soil. And at the end of this presentation, you will be able to connect with him with questions face to face, but also you can make your questions on the chat. And then we will read the questions to him. At the end of the discussion or presentation, we will send you a survey to see to what extent the advantage of this presentation. And that way we will be able to know if our webinar is accomplishing what we want in one way to accomplish, to transfer to you some good knowledge and information for you to be a successful gardener or gardener. Please, let's welcome Dr. Jurrizo. He is going to start presenting at this time.
All right, so thank you very much, Dr. Gonzalez. I'm having a last-minute video issue, but I hope everyone can hear me. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so can you see the screen, my PowerPoint presentation right there?
Yes.
Very good.
Yes.
So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation in which I'll talk about soils or understanding soils as part of Home Gardening Entrepreneurship Series. My name is Dr. Tunisa Jurrizo, as Dr. Gonzalez said. So I am a soil scientist here in Cooperative Research and Extension at Lincoln University of Missouri. So this is the outline of my presentation. I will be talking about the definition of soil. And then we briefly talk about components of soil, which includes minerals, organic matter, soil water, soil air, and soil organisms. And after that, we'll talk about soil fertility, what it means. And after that, we talk about soil pH. And then finally, we talk about soil management. And as part of soil management, we will briefly talk also about composting. Okay, so the very general definition of soil is that it is the uppermost layer of earth, and it is composed of, like I said, 5 things. The first one is minerals, and then you have organic matter, water, air, and living organisms. And it is because of the combination of all these 5 things that soil is capable of supporting plant growth.
Do we need to write this down, or is it something that you're going to send us?
Yeah, we will share the PowerPoint presentation, and I'm pretty sure they will also share the recording as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's take a brief look at each of these key components of soil, okay? So the first one is minerals. There are about 92 naturally occurring chemical elements, but only a few of them are considered to be essential for plant growth. Okay, so these include calcium, magnesium, manganese, nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, boron, sulfur, and some others too. So what happens is that plants remove this mineral nutrients from the soil solution, and then plants incorporate them into its tissues to grow and develop. So humans and animals, when we eat plants, we get our minerals or nutrients from the plants. Okay, so the second component of soil is organic matter, which is also very important. So organic matter is any substance that is derived from dead or decaying plant and animal bodies, and usually up to 5% of the soil volume consists of organic matter. Okay, so if you have a given volume of soil, 5% of it is usually organic matter. So this organic matter is very crucial for your soil because it serves as a glue for water and nutrients. So if your soil has a good organic matter content, it can store water and nutrients for later use. So what you are seeing on those two photos right there is that, for example, on the top you have two soils, soil A and soil B. So the two soils have the same texture. So what that means is that they have the same amount of silt, the same amount of clay, and the same amount of sand. So those are the building blocks of any soil. Okay, so those are the primary particles. And these two soils have the same proportion, the same amount of those three particles I just mentioned, but they have different amount of organic matter. So as you can see, soil A has high organic matter because of the abundance of those plant roots right there, and it's also darker in color because organic matter tends to give soils a darker color, okay? And there is also a presence of some worms in there because there is food. Wherever there is food, there is always worms, okay? And soil B has its organic matter content depleted, okay? It has less organic matter content. So the photo down below is showing you that these two soils are transferred into two separate containers, okay? So the depths of penetration of water is different. So as you can see in container 1, the depths of penetration of water is less than in container 2. So the reason for that is because in container 1, the soil has high organic matter content. So it holds the water mostly in the upper part of the container. So it's preventing, organic matter is preventing the water from going downward, okay? So organic matter is very important to hold water, also as a source of those mineral nutrients as well. So you can just, by looking at the color of your soil, you can tell whether your soil has high organic matter or low organic matter content. But if you want to know the exact amount, then you have to have your soil measured for organic matter content.
Are you saying that that brown stuff is water?
So the darker portion
Yes.
is water, yes.
Okay, okay. I
Yeah.
didn't understand.
Yeah. So the third component of soil is soil water. So in a given volume of soil, so 50% is usually pore space. So those are a network of spaces that are occupied by either water or air. And the water in those pore spaces is very important because it's a medium for transport of those mineral nutrients from the soil solution into the roots of the plants. Okay, and plants also need water for photosynthesis. That's a process by which plants make their own food, sugar. Okay, so if there is no water in the soil, plants cannot make their own food or sugar. So water is very important in the soil. And this water is very different from the water we drink, because the water we drink is very pure water, whereas the water in the soil is, it has a lot of dissolved organic substance, including those mineral nutrients. So in addition to being very important for the plants, the water in the soil is very important for microorganisms as well, because microbes like humans, they respire and they also do some metabolic activities. For that, they require water as well. So the fourth component is soil air. So there are gases found in the air, which include oxygen, carbon dioxide, and water vapor. And of this, oxygen is the most important one, okay? And the reason for that is that plant roots and microorganisms in the soil, they need oxygen to respire, okay? For their metabolic activity, they need oxygen. So oxygen is very important. Where oxygen comes from, it comes from the atmosphere, okay? So those pore spaces I just talked about are very important for the exchange of air between soil and air. So the last component of soil is soil organisms. So there are many, many organisms in the soil, which includes bacteria, fungi, arthropods, nematodes, and earthworms. And if you don't know, in a given volume of soil, for example, in a handful of soil, there are more microbes than there are people on this planet Earth, okay? So there are plenty of microbes in a very tiny volume of soil. And what these organisms do, they do a lot of very important things, including decomposition of organic matter. So that decomposition of organic matter releases the nutrients in that organic matter. So let's take a look at this video. I hope it works to better understand the functions that are performed by organisms. So it's just a 2-minute video. So hopefully it gives you a better idea of the functions of soil organisms.
These towering Douglas firs depend on networks of tiny fungus for water and other nutrients. We typically see only the fungal fruits that poke above the soil, mushrooms. But a lot is happening under the surface. Let's dive below ground to take a closer look. Living fungal threads called hyphae connect the mushroom to an underground network of activity. Ants help maintain healthy soil, aerating the dirt, circulating water, and moving nutrients around. Tiny moss mites dine on miniature worms called nematodes. Nematodes consume single-celled amoebas far smaller than our eyes can see. Amoebas devour even tinier bacteria. And bacteria also need to eat. they feed on the remains of previous generations of forest dwellers. In nature, nothing is wasted. The fungal hyphae decompose matter too, and we can follow them toward the roots of the Douglas fir. The fungus wraps around the root tip. Viewing a slice through the root, we see hyphae pushing into the spaces between the tree's cells. At the molecular scale, a chemical exchange takes place. The fungus supplies the tree with much needed minerals, while the tree provides the fungus with energy-rich sugars. Nutrients for energy. A fair trade.
All right, so these soil organisms are very, very important because they help plants get their water, and also they provide some nutrients as well. So these are very, very important creatures in the soil. So with that being said, a soil is considered to be healthy and fertile soil if it has very good structure and it contains plenty of mineral nutrients for plant growth, and when it promotes biological activity that regulate organic matter breakdown. So these biological activities include the organisms we just saw in that video there. So in this picture here, what we see is those three components there: biological activity on the left. So those are the worms, bacteria, fungi, nematodes. And on the far right, what you have is the soil structure. So that's the physical condition of the soil. So soil structure is the arrangement of sand, silt, and clay glued together by the fungal hyphae, plant roots, and organic matter. So as a result of that arrangement, you have a network of pores, okay? Some of those pore spaces are important for storage of water, and some of those pore spaces are very important for circulation of air. So right in the middle, what we have is soil chemistry. So all those nutrients, the phosphorus, potassium, calcium, boron, all those mineral nutrients that plants need as food, okay? So you can see by your eyes the soil structure and the soil biology, but you cannot see the chemical content or the mineral content of your soil. So that's why you need to test your soil to have a better idea of how much mineral nutrients are present in your soil. Okay, so when we talk about soil fertility, and it's also very important to talk about soil pH, which is the measure of acidity or alkalinity. So soil acidity is like a taste of a vinegar or a lemon juice. It's sour. And soil alkalinity is the exact opposite of acidity, and it's like the taste of seawater. Okay, it has a lot of salt, and it tastes like baking soda as well. And crops, they cannot grow on acidic or alkaline soils. So in order to know whether your soil is acidic or alkaline, you need to test your soil, okay? So when you send your soil to soil testing labs nearby, so what they do is they measure the pH and report it on a scale of 0 to 14, okay? So that figure there, you have pH on a scale of 0 to 14, pH of 7 is called neutral pH. It's like pure water. So pH less than 7 is acidic, and pH above 7 is alkaline. So those two extremes are not good for crops, okay? crops like neutral pH, something around 7. Okay, so almost all crops, they need a neutral pH. So that's not acidic and that's not alkaline either. So the reason why soil pH is important is because, as you can see in that figure there, so except fungi, which doesn't have any problem, performing very well under any pH condition, but bacteria and some mineral nutrients, they tend to be more abundant in that narrow pH range of between 6 and 7, okay? So bacteria, it doesn't like acidic pH. That means pH less than 6 is not good for bacteria. If you go, down below 6, nitrogen is not available or less available. Potassium is less available. Sulfur is less available. But if you go above pH 7, on the other hand, so you have less availability of iron, manganese, copper, boron, and zinc. So these are very important micronutrients or food for plants. So the better or the best pH range for availability of these mineral nutrients and bacteria is that pH range between 6 and 7. So the other thing I would like to point out in this figure is aluminum. So aluminum is Al, okay, so that's the symbol for aluminum. So it's very abundant in acidic pH. In pH below 5, there is plenty of aluminum, and that's not good for plants because aluminum is very toxic for roots, okay? So in that case, if your soil's pH is below 5, you need to treat it with or amend it with limestone in order to raise the pH closer to 6 and 7, okay? And alkaline soils, that means soils that have a lot of calcium, magnesium, and all these salts. All you have to do is just apply or use very good quality of irrigation water in order to leach out excess salt from your soil, okay? So the final piece I would like to talk about is soil management. Reason why we talk about soil management is because if you don't take proper care of your soil, it will degrade, meaning the soil cannot perform its normal functions, okay? It cannot provide a sufficient amount of mineral nutrients. It is not able to, facilitate the exchange of air between soil and the atmosphere. It cannot hold water. It's not good for plants. So you have to manage your soils. So how you can manage your soil? There are a number of good management practices out there that can be applied, including, regular testing of your soil, and compost addition is very important. Okay, so what's compost and what's composting? So composting is a practice of creating partially stabilized, very useful organic decay product by mixing, piling, or storing organic materials under conditions favorable to aerobic decomposition. So this process of breaking down the organic matter is performed by those soil microorganisms, and they like aerobic conditions. So what that means is they require oxygen, okay? So you have to make sure that there is plenty of oxygen in that compost pile when you make your own compost. So the way you do that is you mix and turn your compost pile, in a regular basis. So the finished product of that composting process is called compost, which is useful for potting mixes as organic soil conditioner and as a slow release fertilizer as well. So there are materials that can be used to make your own compost. And this include 3 leaves. And it is best if those leaves are shredded. And grass clippings can also be used, especially if they are green. That is better because they have a lot of nitrogen and they can make that process of breaking down faster. So weeds can also be used. So weeds are plants that grow out of place, okay? Place where they are not wanted to grow. So when you are using that kind of plants, make sure that they are not going into making seeds, okay? So you have to use them before they produce seeds. Kitchen scraps, wood shavings, wood chips, animal manure, food processing wastes. These are all materials that can be used to make your own compost. But there are also materials that you should avoid. For example, meat scraps should be avoided because they give compost a very bad odor, and they also attract rodents, so they should be avoided. Cat droppings, those are also not good because they usually tend to harbor microorganisms that are harmful for infant children and pregnant women as well. And sawdust material from lumber or plywood processing plants, those are not good either because of the presence of heavy metals and arsenic, and those are not good for human health. So you should avoid using sawdust. And the last material you should avoid is plastics and glasses. Obviously, plastics and glasses, those are non-biodegradable. So, microorganisms cannot break those down. So you should avoid those when you're thinking about making your own compost. So as far as method of composting, so, a backyard compost pile should be at least 1 meter square and 1 meter high, because if you're thinking about using anything less than that, then at the end of the day, what you get is a very small amount of compost material, which is not worth the time and effort that you invest in. So make sure that your compost pile is at least 1 meter square and 1 meter high. So there are compost bins available to make turning the compost easier. People in dry areas, they usually make compost in pits that are dug about 1 meter deep in order to prevent the material from drying. Also, oftentimes, a small amount of garden soil or finished compost is added because that way you can make sure that there is plenty of decomposer microorganisms will be immediately available to start breaking down that organic material. So low oxygen levels due to inadequate turning and also with excessive moisture can produce a very bad odor. So you have to monitor the temperature and moisture in the compost pile in order to help avoid those situations. And properly, moist compost should feel damp, but not dripping wet when squeezed. So those are really some of the considerations if you are planning to make your own compost. And there are finally some resources if you are thinking about having your soil tested for, chemical nutrients or soil pH, or soil organic matter, soil structure, soil texture. You can send your soil sample to, for example, University of Missouri, a Soil Health Assessment Center. So there is a contact information for that lab. And another lab to consider is Kinsey Agricultural Services Lab. That's in Charleston, Missouri. You can send your soil samples to that place as well. So those are places where you can have your soil tested for any of these properties. And finally, these are some resources, reading materials for you to consider when you have time to read over. So with that, I end my presentation and I'll just turn it over to Dr. Gonzalez. So I think it's time for questions and answers, I guess.
Yes, you're right. Thank you, Dr. Urrizo, for your great presentation. It's very helpful what you mentioned today in this presentation. If we follow all those recommendations, I'm very sure the gardeners are going to be able to succeed in what they are doing right now. Soil is, for me, for many people, is one of the main elements to be successful in gardening. Soil health, being able to be healthy in the soil, that's one of the main steps. Okay, please feel free to ask questions. He is available to respond any question you have.
Question. On a
Yes.
compost pile, how often should you turn the compost in a compost pile?
Okay, so the question is, how often do you turn your compost in a compost pile? So that's a very, I think, very good question. So there are, if I don't sound too technical, so there are 3 stages of compost making. So there is an initial stage. So there is the second stage called thermophilic stage, where the temperature builds all the way up to 60 and 75. And then the third stage and final stage where temperature drops down to ambient temperature. So the best time to turn or mix your compost is at the very middle. Usually, I would say a month and a half or 2 months after you start making the compost pile. And the way you can tell the best time to turn is just take a temperature measurement, okay? If the temperature is above 50 and 60, I think that is the time when you start turning that compost pile.
Yes, can I ask my question?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Soil testing, what is the cost? And at what stage is it cost effective to take your soil for testing, depending on how big your plot is or your garden is?
Okay, so a question about cost of soil testing and whether or not it's cost effective depending on your plot size. That's also another great question. I would say this. You cannot manage what you cannot measure because you don't know what is in there, okay? So it's very important to test your soil no matter what. For example, let's say you don't know, you did not test the pH of your soil, and your pH of that soil is very low, and you try to grow some kind of vegetables, you are not going to be able to successful because the pH is very low, okay? So it's a wastage of time for you to prepare that seed bed, to apply some compost, trying to grow vegetables and stuff like that. And at the end of the day, you get nothing because soil pH is very acidic and plants cannot grow in acidic soil. So the first and most important step before you start growing vegetables or any plants, any crops, is just to test the pH, organic matter, and some other properties, okay? The most important one would be, in my opinion, is pH and organic matter content. If the pH is very low, let's say below 5, then you might consider applying limestone in order to raise the pH so that you will be able to grow something on it. So depending on your plot size, up to 1 acre, you can take soil samples from, let's say, 5 or 8 different locations in that 1 acre field. So you combine that all together, mix it very well, take a subsample, and the subsample of, let's say, 100 or 200 grams soil, you send it to soil testing lab, ask them to do testing of pH, organic matter, and then usually for pH, I think it's not more than $5 per sample. Okay, so for pH is $5. For organic matter, I think it's also about $5 or $6 per sample. So for less than $20, you can have a lot of things tested in your soil. So I would highly recommend before you start doing anything to have your soil tested for some of these very important properties.
I have another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've been trying to grow flowers, and I usually just go to the store and buy a bag of Miracle-Gro. Is that not a good idea, or is there something better that I should be doing? I grow them in pots.
Okay, so that's a very good question. I'm not sure, or I'm not familiar with the material that you just described. I mean, I would say if you use that material and if you have been successful in growing what you are growing, that is fine. But as an expert, if you ask my expert opinion, I would just have that material tested, okay? So I just want to know what is in that material, okay? So I want to know the pH of that material, the chemical nutrients in that material, the organic matter, the microorganisms, all those things. That way I can tell you what you are growing is really healthy, because nothing, I mean, don't get me wrong, but nothing is like growing, you know, vegetables or crops in a natural soil.
May I add something?
Yes.
This is Nadia Navarrete Tindo.
Yes.
I work with wildflowers. That is my, I grow them using different soil media. And what she's referring as Miracle-Gro is really a very commercial, very well-known soil that is available in many nurseries and other places. But I use it only as my last resource, because I prefer to use compost, and as you say, I prefer topsoil, so I can make my own mix. And there are different other sources too, that is not just Miracle-Gro.
Yeah.
In the case of wildflowers, you don't really need that kind of soil, but it's and I think they sell different. I mean, depending on what you are using it for, they have different kinds. It may be Amy is not here, but master gardeners use that a lot. I don't know if Jessica.
This is Sarah Eber. I was going to comment that I have used Miracle-Gro, and honestly, over time, you see some soil depletion and some of your plants don't work as well. It really doesn't work as good in the soil. It's not bad to enhance some growth, but you still really want to amend that soil and make sure you're putting in some compost and organic material throughout the year and keep your soil healthy. I have seen gardens that use nothing but those kind of commercial liquid fertilizers, and the year they stop using them, nothing grows well there at all. I also needed to ask you, Dr. Tunisia, that there's a comment in the chat box. It's a question. Someone asking if there's a quick test, a kind of a do-it-yourself test that small-scale farmers can use to check their soil.
All right, thank you, Sarah, for that. I would like to say this as far as using commercial materials as a growing media. Okay, so I think at some point I have to work with people in cooperative extension down there. So I think it would be a nice idea to have this, commercial materials or growing medium, including the one from Miracle Grow, and then do some kind of greenhouse experiment where you try to grow different types of vegetables, and then compare the performance of those materials on the quality of those vegetables as well. So that way we can give to you our unbiased scientific research-based information. But at this point in time, if whatever you are using is working, that's fine with me. But I think at some point down the road, we have to do some kind of greenhouse experiment, and we should be able to tell you how that compares with the natural soil. So as for the question in the chat, so whether there is a quick test, yes, there are some quick tests that small-scale growers can use. For example, I think for pH, there are some kits. Even for organic matters, there are some very cheap, affordable kits that can be purchased online. Even in some cases, you can find, I think, pH strips, phosphorus strips. I think pH strip from Walmart, but phosphorus strip from online that you can use to test some of the chemical nutrients and the pH of your soil. What I'm going to do is just generate a list of those test kits or test strips and share that information with you guys later, if that's fine with you.
Good.
Yes, I've got another question.
Okay.
You talked about the microorganisms which are found on the soil, topsoil. Mm-hmm. Now, when we get forest fires, huge forest fires, at times even year after year, mm-hmm. Isn't the fire, or doesn't that fire destroy the microorganisms? Is there a consequence of that, of the killing of those microorganisms?
Okay, so the question is whether or not forest fires have an impact on soil organisms. And so that's also another great question. First of all, I have to make this disclaimer. I don't work with forest soils, but based on my readings, yes, it does. Forest fire does affect the composition of soil microorganisms, because when you are burning, you are somehow changing the composition of the plant community. Okay, so there are microorganisms that are suited for very specific type of vegetation, but not for other type of vegetation. So you are going to definitely change, or the fire is going to change the composition of microorganisms, because when you are burning organic matter, mainly the above ground biomass, but there are still some organic matter below ground in the form of roots. So that can help maintain some of these beneficial microorganisms. So yes, fire can affect microorganisms, but to what extent, I am not quite sure, because I don't really work in forest soils.
Good. Yeah. It seems like we are passing the time for questions.
I have another question.
Okay, let's do it.
All right.
Sometimes the deer will come to my house and they will leave droppings. Should I put that in the compost pile?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure. What do a deer feed on? What do they normally?
They eat roses.
So yeah, I mean, it all depends.
Good point.
Yeah, it depends on what they eat. You know, if you
They're
think,
herbivores.
yeah. So I mean, if they're herbivores, I mean, it should not be a problem. But I would just, personally, I would avoid using that kind of, waste from wild animals. I don't know if deer is considered as a wild animal or not, but.
It is. I think the issue you want to be careful with on your compost is anytime you're using herbivore manure, you really have to give it a lot of time, more time than just plant material, to compost and biodegrade so that it's safe.
Yeah.
So let it dry out and then put it in the pile?
Right, right. And make sure that your compost pile is well away from your garden space so that it doesn't leach any unhealthy microbes into the garden space.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
What was the question?
It was about deer droppings.
What was the question?
The question was whether it's a good idea to use deer droppings in compost, or just to make compost.
Remember, deers are ruminants, and they have the same system than cows. So they process the food in 4 rumens, 4 stomachs. So they are able to produce very good manure.
It's great manure. You just have to give it time to cure and give the microbes time to get rid of all the bad stuff. And then it works really good, but you just got to give it that extra time. And decomposed plants are not as much of an issue that way in many situations.
Rabbits are good. Rabbit manure.
Well, is there more questions? Because to finish the session today, we had an end survey evaluation. You can answer it today at this time. It is in the chat. But if you are not able to answer it, I will email it to you. You have some time right now. You can take the time and just answer it, so I don't bother you with another email later on. And we want to thank you, Dr. Currizo, for his presentation. I feel like this webinar is helping us to connect with the garden and soil and all the elements that interact to grow food. Next session will be Dr. Jessica's presentation about how to start your gardening outside. And we are looking forward to see you next week. The survey is on the chat. Just go click it, and then thank you for helping us to provide this information to you. And we'll see you next week.
Yeah, thank you very much all for coming today. And if you have any question related to soil, when we share this PowerPoint presentation, I will put my contact information out there so you can reach out to me via email or phone anytime, okay? I'm happy to help in any way I can. So thank you all for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doc.
Good evening.
All right, good evening, everyone.